Hello. Good morning or afternoon or evening, as the case may be. This is your third live event talking about high notes and singing over the break. I've got a few more questions that I'm going to talk about here, and then I'm going to show you some exercises that we use to help with navigating over the secondo passaggio. And then I've got a bunch of information for you about how you can take that a step further. So, to begin with, how might the advice differ for older, over 60-year-old singers? How can older singers adapt your advice for their personal weaknesses, both singing over the break and singing high notes? One of the most challenging things for vocalists who have sung for a long time, so if you're 60, and I could be wrong about this, my assumption is that you've been singing for quite some time. And if I'm wrong about that, sorry, I'm expecting, what is this? Okay. If you've been singing for a very long time, perhaps one of the most challenging things about adapting your technique, learning new technique, is you have to make some changes. You have to be willing to do things differently. So, and this is based on the idea that if you've been singing for a very long time, but the results you're getting are unsatisfactory, then doing the same thing is probably going to result in further unsatisfactory results. You're going to have to make some changes, and that can be very difficult. This is especially true when it involves breath management. Very frequently, when I am working with vocalists that have been singing for a very long time, they can be very defensive about their breathing technique, even when they don't have any, which is very frequently the case. That sounds like a kind of snotty thing to say, and I apologize for that, but this has played out over and over again. And at the end of the day, it just ends up taking more time. So as an older vocalist, you will have habits, you will have predispositions, you will perhaps have very well-formed, concrete ideas about how it's supposed to be or how you think it is. But if you're still getting results you don't like, I would call those items into question. And I would try to cultivate an openness, an idea around being open and willing to try new things. Having done that, just start the exercises. The techniques that I'm showing you, it doesn't really matter for age. You know, one might make an argument about vocal elasticity. You can still increase your elasticity with practice. It might take longer, but it will ultimately be hampered by an attitude of I'm not going to make any changes, or I'm unwilling to do the things that result in change. So like a lot of times the early stages of upper register technique doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound like singing. It's certainly not a sound you'd want to go out in public with. But they are the tools that we use to learn how to use our voices in a way that will support a good registration event, a good transition across the break, and more effective high note singing. How do I stretch my upper range? How do I stretch my upper range? Is there a natural limit? Sure. Yes. There's a limit to everything. We've only got, like the tissues themselves are only going to ever be able to vibrate so fast unless you then make a transition into whistle tones, in which case then the aperture is only ever going to be as small as you can eventually figure out how to make it. That's going to define your upper limits. But most of us never really find those. I include myself in this. I don't really spend a ton of time exploring the extreme top end of my range because it's just not what I do artistically. I can sing, C5 and D5 and E flat 5, but I don't with any regularity. I do it in vocalizations all the time just to kind of maintain my technique. Beyond that, though, I don't really, I've never done anything with it beyond that. All of that is based on good registration events, much lower down, an octave below that point. And that's what I would say. Like, if you want to stretch your upper range, think about it more as gaining access to it. When we use words like stretch, I mean, yes, we do need to learn to elongate or stretch the vocal folds. That's what cricothyroid dominant singing voice is. Yet, when people use that word stretch, that often comes with the idea that we're belting, and that I would disagree with. That will have a more hard and fast limit to it than if you learn to make good registration events. So if you want to increase your upper register facility, work on your registration events. How does Benson Boone get so much control over that high register, and what is the main difference between his style of high note and, say, Justin Timberlake? Is a singer built more similarly to one than the other? Don't know their voices intimately well enough to know, and I've listened to a bit of Benson Boone, but I'd have to listen an awful lot more to really be able to weigh in on that. Sure, we're all built a little different, but the similarities outweigh the differences in most cases. So when if both of them were to sing with neutral phonation, then they would be vastly more similar than if they start to explore different aspects of the way that what their voices can do. And then you start to see more individual differences come out. At the end of the day, and this is an oversimplification to answer your question that I will elaborate on. But how does one gain so much control over and one might presume that Benson Boone is wanting to have control in this higher register of his voice? It's practice. The caveat to that is that it should be effective practice. So if you're trying to sing something and it's never sounding the way you want it to, then address how you're practicing it. How am I working on this? If I'm continuing to get negative results, or at least results that I don't like, how might I practice this differently in order to get a different result? I talked about that actually in the second live event from this series. I'm going to send out an email tomorrow or the day after that'll have probably tomorrow all 3 of the live event links, so you can go back and listen if you want to check that out. But learning to apply vocalizations to your songs will help bridge the gap in technique, from technique that you can execute in a vocalization to what you can effectively implement in a song. What are the best breathing and vocal exercises to do to make these notes have a rich quality and or increased range? I could not have actually put that question in a better location had I planned. I assure you I didn't plan this, because my planning is frequently woefully inadequate. But perfect question, because I want to show you some of the exercises that we use to learn to sing over the secondo passaggio, over the break. So I'll get into this in a second. But so let's go from back to front. In terms of breathing, apagio breath management. Whether it's from me or from somebody else, it should be apagio breath management, and it should be unquestionably apagio breath management. If they are not talking about creating more stability in the position of the diaphragm, if they're not talking about a lateral expansion of the rib cage, some say breathing into your back, if they're telling you to stick your stomach out and then squeeze it in as you exhale, that's a big no-no. That is not apagio. Now, as you become an apagio practitioner, you'll notice that there's some of that happening, but that's not the answer. And if that's what you're still doing, that will explain a lot of why you're getting not as good of effects as you might like. So the breathing is unquestionably, in my mind, apagio breath management or some derivative of it that's just taught in a way that makes more sense to you. So the actual technique would be the same, but the delivery mechanism would be more suitable to your learning styles. We all have different modalities, if you like, of learning. And basically. Same information delivered in a different way. So, upper register singing. I'm still getting over this really bad cold, so lots of fluids. One of the hardest things about learning to sing over the break is that a lot of the initial exercises just don't sound very good. And I think that there is it's either confusion or a desire, such a desire to move on that vocalists are not willing to spend the time to develop the consistency to actually be effective and to really learn to make a good transition over the break. So for example, I'll show you. I'll split the view here so that you can see the piano as well. For reference, this is middle C. And my secondo passaggio is about here. This is fairly typical for tenors. Baritones can have their secondo passaggio in this zone, roughly, on average. Sopranos and mezzos have their primo passaggi here. Frequently, that transition, that register event for the sopranos and mezzos often responds and feels much like the secondo passaggio for tenors and baritones. So after many, many years of insisting on calling it only by the secondo passaggi moniker, I've actually conceded that calling it the break makes a little bit of sense. When I start learning or teaching, I should say teaching at this point, teaching someone to sing over the break, I begin with a very straightforward exercise. Make it sound just like me. You, 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 you. And as simple as that sounds, you might be surprised how many ways people will sing that without actually making it sound like that. You, 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 you. It's important to notice what it is. You, 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 you. Very hollow, kind of hooty sounding on that G. Everything else is more like my normal voice. You, 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 you. But it must be like that. Anything else isn't right. So if it were you, 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 well, that was too airy. Or you, 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 that was too squeezy. And a big challenge when we're learning to do these exercises is that we're so hyper-focused on just hitting the pitch, singing the note. We completely miss the fact of how we're doing it. And when I'm working with an individual in a private lesson, I will tell them in the early stages of this, I don't even care if you actually sing the right note. It's more important that you figure out how to make your voice do those sounds that I'm doing here. And then we will refine it and you will do the right notes. How is, in the early stages, more important than being super precise. And further to that end, I would say, I'm asking you to do something very different with your voice if you've never done this before. You're going to be out of tune. You're probably going to be hitting all kinds of weird stuff. That is to be expected and, in fact, to be encouraged. Because if you haven't been doing this before, and it's the first time, then getting a different result is a huge achievement. What I'm doing with that exercise is I'm basically showing you the beginning stages. How do we get started with this? And having done that, we continue to refine the process. So you'll notice that this starts on a descending pattern. You. That is intentional. It is done that way because most of our habits around singing high notes are built on ascending scales or phrases. And so by doing it descending, we create an opportunity to do it differently with a little bit less of that old habit exerting its influence. But obviously, you're going to have to sing up and down and every which way else. So in not too short a period of time, you start to ascend too. You. But it is absolutely critical that every time that top note in this exercise be that hollow cricothyroid dominant sound. You. Many people do the early exercises like that one and get it right once and assume that they've got it. And I suppose for some, maybe that's fine. They just want to know that they can do it. But that won't result in consistently being able to sing high notes effectively. I don't know how long I would have to repeat that pattern before I would miss it. This is not, in the strictest of senses, a hard exercise. It's a very basic exercise. It is one of the more basic exercises when it comes to learning how to sing high notes. And it only gets more challenging from here. Once you've developed success here, and let's just say success as is defined at, if you sang it 100 times, maybe you miss it once. But at that point, I would expect you not to miss it at all. If you can do 99 out of 100, you can basically do 100 out of 100. It's just so fundamental to what we're doing. But let's move on. You'll notice that I told you my break, my secondo passaggio, is about here. And I gave it a little bit of space. This makes it easier to do the transition. In the next exercise, I narrow the space, and that makes it more challenging. So, for example, I'll probably choose B major. You, we. You'll notice that the D sharp has quite a lot of modification on it for the E vowel. We must observe good vowel modification as well in the zona di passaggio. The zona di passaggio is the primo passaggio to the secondo passaggio, the space in between. It's the area where we make all of these adjustments so that we get a good transition over the break. So you'll notice that every one of these pitches sounds a little bit different because of where it lies in my range. This one, which is only just on the top edge of my secondo passaggio, has that cricothyroid sound. This one is thyroarytenoid dominant, but quite modified. This one is very thyroarytenoid dominant, unmodified. By making those micro adjustments through the zona de passaggio, we get a good transition over the break. And once you've done that, you move on to scales. And you move on to then, once you're singing scales, then you're really moving back and forth across the secondo passaggio, or for sopranos and mezzos, the primo passaggio. Altos, this is all appropriate to you around G, G sharp. So you'll do all those. You'll do all the same exercises, just displaced up to this point. You start moving scales, and once you're doing scales across the registration event, then you really are starting to make just the right amount of adjustments so that you get a good transition. Those generally take the shape of fast moving exercises like you've seen in my videos before. You really get a feel for how to make those micro adjustments going up and then coming down. And then we move on to solid vowels. Again, my break is right here. So I'm going back up, I'm going across my break on the up, ascending, and then I'm coming back down. And I'm making the modifications and getting ready for that transition on the way up, and then I'm removing all those modifications on the way down. Even at this very modest tempo, it's too fast to try to consciously do them. You have to practice them over and over again. And the way that I have found to be most effective to do this is to split things up. So you split exercises up that are registration event focused, just going back and forth across the break. And then you have exercises that work on vowel modifications, where you're either like removing them on a descending pattern or adding them on an ascending pattern, and you keep it in a narrow band of key areas. And then you have integration practices, where you're doing these big, wider, sweeping scales that go back and forth across the break, so that you get an opportunity and you get used to what it feels like to gradually add modification and allow for elongation, and then gradually take it all away. And that is what you will find laid out in High Note Bootcamp. And that's what this is all about. I open enrollment to High Note Bootcamp. I did it once last year in 2025. My expectation, I think I'm going to do it twice this year, but I don't have any firm plans around that. If I did open High Note Bootcamp for enrollment, it won't be again until the fall. But as of right now, High Note Bootcamp is open to enrollment. When you enroll in High Note Bootcamp, you get my specific step-by-step set of exercises that I use in my private teaching. I mean, this was my own personal practice as well, but it's a sequence that I developed in order to help vocalists sing beyond their breaks. It is far more granular and step-by-step than anything that you will find of mine on YouTube, even the 3-video High Note series that I have shared a link to in the previous 2 live events. You can go find it in the chat if you want to check it out. One of the chief complaints about it is that the exercises in it are so extremely short. But it is because of what I have explained here that I have made it that way. Additionally, every exercise has 5 Fox. So it has soprano, mezzo-soprano, alto, tenor, and baritone, to try to cover for the individual differences in a given vocalist, and to cover for vocalists who haven't had this technique before. So you can experiment with the various Fox to find more information about your voice, and then start to work through the program. During this enrollment period, if you purchase High Note Bootcamp, you get a free half-hour lesson with me. My intention around doing that was to basically, I wanted to be able to meet with people that were going to take the program to try to help you get off to the right start, to set expectations, listen to you sing a little bit, and give you some ideas about like where you might come into the program or other stuff that you might do before you start the program to better prepare yourself to do the exercises that are in High Note Bootcamp. You are, of course, under no obligation to take the lesson. You don't have to, but if you did, then you could. It would be available to you. It'll just be in your account if you decide to get High Note Bootcamp. Equally, during this enrollment period, I'm also including a year in the RVC, my private online community on my website. So the idea behind the RVC, I built the RVC initially as a support system for people enrolled in High Note Bootcamp. It has grown a lot beyond that. But the core like value of it still remains. And it's just me. I mean, well, like it's a community. So there's like lots and lots of other people. And there are other professional vocalists in that community. But if you tag me at Jeffrey Rolka when you post something, then I'm going to answer, not somebody else. I mean, although other people might chime in, but I will get that and I will be able to help you. And this is meant to be an ongoing system of support if you're in High Note Bootcamp but need more help, but don't want to take lessons or can't take lessons, and you've already used the lesson with me. You can post audio and embed. You can embed audio and video, and then I can go and listen and offer some advice and help and things like that. Sometimes I respond by writing. Sometimes I respond in video format. Sometimes I respond in audio format. All depends on the question. And finally, as if that's already not enough, I just released, this is sort of a double enrollment period. It was an accidental release of the fundamentals of singing. I didn't mean to release it, but this is the time when you're glad I'm a singing instructor, not a web designer. I didn't realize what I had done when I sent out the free section of it. So my Fundamentals of Singing course has been released recently, and when you buy High Note Bootcamp, you will be offered an opportunity to buy the fundamentals, if you haven't done so already, at I think it's 30 some odd % off or something like that. So a significant discount to fill in even more of the gaps in teaching. High Note Bootcamp is broken up into practice videos. So when it's time to practice, you don't have to deal with me talking. And there's also there's a lecture series in the High Note Bootcamp, which is separate from the fundamentals course. I'm certain there's a little bit of overlap, but not really that much, because the High Note Bootcamp lecture series is entirely focused on just upper register response and things like that. So High Note Bootcamp is open to enrollment. My final thought here is that the last thing I ever want to do is sell something that is not useful to specifically you if you are considering enrolling in High Note Bootcamp. Please send an email to me. You can use if you don't have my email address yet, you can get it, or you can send an email to me or a message to me via the contact sheet on my website. Please ask your questions before you make your purchase. I do not want to sell anyone anything that they cannot use or do not need. And I have it's been rare, but I have had a few people that I have said, actually, I think it would be better. There's been more than a few people where I've said, I don't know if this is right for you, some of which have gone and bought it anyway and then been fine with it and actually really enjoyed the RVC, which is cool. But I've had some others too where, we've had like some email correspondence. I built the course to help people sing over the break, but if it's not right, I will tell you to the best of my ability, or I will tell you I'll tell you in an unvarnished fashion what I'm thinking as pertains to specifically your case, and then you can come to your own conclusions about that. But I want people to have the resources that they want and need, and not any more than that. So get in touch if you're not sure. Please get in touch if you're not sure. I will help as best as I possibly can. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for a wonderful 3-video series. Again, thank you for all the questions. High Note Bootcamp is open. If it's right for you, check it out. If you're not sure, send a message and I will do the best that I can to help. And until next time, thank you so very much for being a part of the newsletter. We're going to get through the next 10 days where you're going to see a lot of information and reminders that High Note Bootcamp is open and stuff like that. But once we're done with that, it'll be back to, sort of business as usual with me sharing links and information and thoughts via the newsletter. So I'm going to thank you in advance for bearing with me during this short period. And have a wonderful day. Thank you so very much. Look forward to seeing you in High Note Bootcamp if you choose to enroll, and the RVC for the next year. Should be fun. All right. Thank you.